Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. Today we are going to be looking ahead at the upcoming NFC Championship weekend games between the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Lions and the 49ers. That'll take up the majority of the first half of the show, and then in the latter half we will be talking about some updates in the head coaching cycle in the NFL, which does not include Bill Belichick. So we will be talking about what is next for the legendary coach. And then finally, to wrap up the show, we are going to be touching on another historic franchise in a sense, the Golden State Warriors, who have just dropped another game last night against the Sacramento Kings. So we're going to be taking a look at that team and asking the question whether or not they have reached the point where they are no longer in contention. Before we get into the show today, just want to remind you all to please remember to like and follow. Helps us out a lot. And for any of our live viewers, just remember to use that link that is scrolling across the bottom ticker to help get your questions the priority they deserve to help tip. Again, helps us out a lot. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. So without further ado, getting into our first preview here, the Chiefs versus the Ravens. This game is taking place in Baltimore. The first postseason matchup between Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in their careers. Mahomes has won the regular season matchup series so far. He is 3-1 against Lamar, but obviously different stakes here. Now Mahomes' second true road playoff game after defeating Josh Allen and the Bills last week on the road. And meanwhile, the Baltimore Ravens, yes, maybe a little bit of a slow start, but a truly dominant performance for them on both sides. So getting into this matchup here, the Ravens, as of today, are 4-point favorites. They were initially 3.5-point favorites, but that line has since shifted. So before we get into predictions, just some key injury updates for the Chiefs. Joe Thuney, their all-pro guard the past two seasons, he is listed as doubtful for the game. He went down late in their matchup last week with a pec injury. There's speculation that it is a torn pec, so he is not expected to play, which is pretty significant. Especially tough timing losing him now, coming up against the Ravens, who had the most sacks in the NFL this season. That defensive front is monster, so tough timing there with losing Joe Thuney. They didn't end up getting home last week, but they really dominated, in my opinion, the Houston front throughout the entire game. On the Ravens side of this, Mark Andrews is now expected to play. He went down with a serious ankle injury during their Week 11 matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. It was initially speculated that he would be done for the season, but he's been ramping up in practice the past couple weeks. He was listed as a full participant today, so good news on that front. And I'm sure that the Ravens are thrilled to have him back. Anything that they can get from him that at this point is a positive. Now, obviously, it's never good to lose a player to injury in general, especially your top threat. But that being said, again, considering the fact that Mark Andrews, anything that they get out of him is a positive at this point, I think that him missing the time that he did, it was really the first time in Lamar's career that he didn't have Andrews, and somewhat as a result, he was forced to spread the ball around a little bit more. And subsequently, I think that Isaiah Likely, their backup tight end, has been phenomenal in Andrews' absence. He's been a true red zone threat in the 7 full games in which Andrews has not played with the Ravens since Week 11. likely has 6 touchdowns, so he's been ramping up. He had one last week against the Texans. So this Baltimore offense that's been so good, adding more so to it. Another couple injury updates on the Ravens here. Marlon Humphrey, their number 1 quarterback, he has had limited participation in practice the past few days. He missed last week. And their starting guard, Kevin Zeitler, who got injured during that Texans game, he did return to practice on Thursday. So looking at this matchup as a whole, this is the number 1 scoring defense from the regular season versus the number 2 scoring defense in the regular season. Going into last week's game in the divisional round, I did a top 5 units between offenses and defenses remaining out of the 8 teams that were remaining. And I had the Ravens defense 1 and the Chiefs defense 2. Both groups have been unbelievable this season, and both were great last week. The Ravens did not allow a single touchdown. The Texans scored on just a punt return touchdown. Other than that, no touchdowns for the Texans. And the Chiefs, while they did get pushed around a bit early in that game, they really buckled down and played lockup defense down the stretch of that Bills game to help them secure the victory. I think that if you look at the team's numbers as a whole from the regular season, if there is any sort of a flaw with either of these groups, it is neither one of them have been great against the run all season. The Chiefs were ranked 17th during the regular season, and as I just mentioned, they were getting pushed around for a good bit there in the Buffalo game before tightening up. They allowed 182 yards on the ground, though, specifically to Josh Allen, who had 72. Now they're going to be facing up against a Lamar Jackson, who we all know how well he can use his legs. So I think that that's really going to be the key matchup here, because you're talking about the Baltimore Ravens offense that runs it better than anybody else in the NFL. 156.5 rush yards per game during the regular season, more than 15 more yards per game than any other team in the NFL. Quite a significant margin. They ran for 229 yards last week against the Texans. So it's going to be a tough job for this Chiefs front specifically in this coming week. Now, I thought that it was interesting the way that as that game progressed, they were able to make adjustments instead of rushing so hard at Josh Allen. They never actually got home on any sacks, but what they were doing is they were having their linemen sort of stay more so at the line of scrimmage. Now, they lost Willie Gay early in that game, who going into the matchup was supposed to be the QB spy for Josh Allen. And once that part was removed from their scheme, they sort of had to come up with other ways to limit him on the ground. Allen still had a good game on the ground. He had 18 rushes on 3 runs he had 18 yards on 3 rushes in the fourth quarter, so they didn't entirely eliminate him. And again, we're talking about Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson here, who are 2 of, if not the best 2 rushing quarterbacks in the NFL, so they at least got somewhat of a simulated look almost in a playoff environment for Lamar. But Lamar is just that much more dangerous in my opinion, and I think that it's going to be a test for them. But again, the Chiefs linemen started just playing the line of scrimmage more so. You saw Chris Jones and others just camping out there. Chris Jones even got a pass deflection he wasn't even trying to rush. He was just staying at the line of scrimmage, keeping eyes on Allen, and trying to maintain protection as best as possible. I think that the Bills did run a handful of quarterback design plays, but they're just not even as nuanced, really, as Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson's offense there in Baltimore. So I think that is going to be a tough test. Now, on the Kansas City side of this, Their offense, they have looked just about as good as they have all season after questions surrounding them the entire year about were their weapons not good enough, what's going on there, and they've been really good. Travis Kelce, who he went through a really quiet stretch to end the regular season, he's been much more effective. Rashee Rice, their rookie wide receiver, I've been really impressed with his maturity throughout the course of the season, and it's asking maybe a lot to expect him to be, he's not going to be a Tyreek Hill that they had during their initial Super Bowl run, but I think that he has developed into, and currently is still, it's an active process of him. He could be a real number one wide receiver for the Chiefs going forward. How effective will he be in this matchup against a very good defense? We are still to see. Now, tough news for the Chiefs is that running back Isaiah Pacheco has not been practicing this week with a toe and ankle injury. Initial diagnostics show that it could be turf toe, which is a brutal blow if he's not going to be able to go, because I think the Chiefs are a much more well-rounded offense when he is playing for them, especially against this defensive group. You are going to need to be able to run the ball against them, and that would be a very tough loss if he is unavailable to play. As far as my picks here, I'm going to go with the Ravens, and obviously right away you have to worry about you're picking against Patrick Mahomes, and that is my one worry here. But other than Patrick Mahomes, I think that the Ravens are just top to bottom a better football team than the Chiefs. The Chiefs are great, they have great coaching, but the Ravens have great coaching, they have even better players. I think that there is, going into this game, obviously a very massive disparity in reputation, specifically pertaining to the playoffs between Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. But I think that Lamar Jackson, this is his time to shine. And if Mahomes is able to pull off this upset win against the number one scoring defense in the NFL, I don't think I'm ever going to pick against him again. I'm just putting that out there now. But I liked them against the Bills last week, but I just think that was a little bit too, yes, their offense looked great, but that Bills defense was dealing with so many injuries on that side to their key players. I think that the Ravens have a lot more to throw at them. If Marlon Humphrey comes back too, that's just another body to help with the Travis Kelce matchup. Ronald Darby was really good last week. He was incredible, really, for the beginning of his career. Has sort of fallen off the map a little bit more, and he's bounced around some, but I think he's still a very solid player. He did a great job with the Nico Collins matchup last week, and I think that it was almost good experience for him then. If they get Humphrey back, that makes them only that much better. But I think that it's going to come down to, I think the Ravens are going to be able to run all over the Chiefs defense. Now the key is going to be turnovers, of course, because if you look at the regular season between these two very good defenses, the Ravens were significantly better at turning the ball over than the Chiefs defense was, and neither of these teams on offense have been turning the ball over through their early playoff wins. But I think that really, despite the disparity in how many more turnovers the Ravens defense created, I think that if they give the Chiefs short fields, Mahomes is going to capitalize on that, make them drive down the field against your very amazing defense. If you give them a short field, you're going to get hurt. You're going to be giving them points, and Mahomes is going to take advantage. I do have the Ravens in this matchup, though, and honestly, I think it's going to be a good game, but I think that the Ravens cover the 4 points. I think that, they're going to score points, in my opinion. And yes, the Chiefs defense has been great, but I think that, again, up front in the trenches, they're going to not really get stopped by the Chiefs. It's a matter of, can the Chiefs put up points and match that against the Ravens defense? I'm not sure. I know their offense has looked better as of late, but there was a very large sample size during the regular season of them being a little underwhelming. Now, just final thoughts here. Mahomes is 9-1-1 against the spread as an underdog in his career. He is 8-3 straight up. So I understand that I'm putting myself at a little bit of a risky point here going against Patrick Mahomes, but I do think that this is the Ravens' year. So that is my predictions on this Chiefs versus Ravens matchup. We're going to be hitting a quick break, but when we come back, I'm going to be then giving my thoughts on the Lions versus 49ers game that's taking place on Sunday as well in the NFC, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about the Chiefs and Ravens preview, I should say. Now we're going to be moving on to the NFC, talking about the Lions versus the 49ers. A little bit of history here. This is the third straight NFC Championship game for the 49ers. They're fourth in the last 5 seasons under Kyle Shanahan, and this is the first one that is taking place at home in San Francisco since 2019, the year in which they went on to the Super Bowl. So I'm sure they are very happy to be back in this position and back at home for the big moment. The Lions here, this is their first championship game appearance since 1991. So, they're going to be fired up. Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, they have the entire city behind their back rolling into this matchup. And sort of the key storylines going into this game is Brock Purdy sort of on trial almost, looking for his redemption after getting hurt early in their NFC Championship game last year against the Eagles. Was a little underwhelming last week against the Packers, but did have that comeback drive to win at the end of the game. And I'm sure that there's a certain level of he feels that he needs to... I'm sure he has the locker room, and that's really all that matters at the end of the day. But this is a guy that is still playing on a 7th-round rookie contract, making under $1 million a year. Very cheap for the quarterback position in the NFL, especially considering being in a conference championship position. He wants to establish himself that he is the best guy for the job, that it's not just a cheap contract that can slide into Kyle Shanahan's offense. He is replacing Jimmy Garoppolo, who, when the 49ers were in this position a couple of years ago, there was some talk about the fact that the 49ers were almost winning in spite of him as opposed to because of him. Purdy still has to, fair or not, continue to prove himself that he's capable of getting it done on the biggest stage. Some key injury situations here. First off, the 49ers are currently 7-point favorites against the Lions in this one. Moving on to injuries here. Deebo Samuel returned to practice on Thursday. He's been dealing with a shoulder injury that kept him out for the majority of the game last week in the divisional round. Nobody for the 49ers fully missed practice on Thursday. Did not have any, did not participate. While on the other side, the Detroit Lions had 2 starting linemen that missed practice the past couple days. That is guard Jonah Jackson and center Frank Ragnow. Ragnow, especially in this situation, is such a key for them. He is a 3-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro. He was selected to both the Pro Bowl and the All-Pro team this season. He took a beating during that 49ers game, and yet despite being in clear pain, he was just a workhorse for them. They ran right behind him despite all the injuries for one of their touchdown runs. It is interesting to see the fact that if you go to the injury report for the Lions, he, at least as of yesterday, was listed as ankle, toe, knee, and back injury. That's a lot of things to overcome, and I don't doubt that he has a very strong chance of playing this game despite all of that, because I feel like he's going to will himself into this game to be there for his team. But hindered one way or another. That's not even including the Jonah Jackson news. So that is something to definitely monitor, because I think that a very large part of the Lions' success this season was because of their offensive line has just added so much value to one of the best offenses in the league. I think that they have a 2-headed monster in the backfield with David Montgomery and rookie running back Jahmyr Gibbs, able to throw 2 different paces at you almost with that combination of backs. But obviously the run game gets hindered somewhat if these guys in Jackson and Ragnow are compromised. And then I think that the other part of it is, I think we all like Jared Goff. I feel like in general the perception is he's a nice redemption story after being a throwaway in the Matthew Stafford trade and just being disregarded, having the Rams win the Super Bowl the season after moving on from him. I think that it's obviously been a great story here for him in Detroit, for Detroit that in themselves is sort of the underdog franchise, the redemption story in their own right. But I think that he is very much benefited from having a good offensive line in front of him. I think the Lions have been just as good as anybody in that front 5. And if you can get to Jared Goff a little bit, I feel like it is very possible to throw him off of his game. Now, he's been, for the most part, money the entire first 2 games of the Lions playoff run. Had 1 play in each game that were close calls. It was the backwards lateral pass that was just mind-blowing at the time in that first matchup against the Rams, but they were able to hop on that and was not an issue. And then in the second game, he almost had a red zone interception, just an underthrown ball, really not a great look on an undercut route from Dean of the 49ers. So just 2 plays really is all that sticks out. But I think that if you can put some more pressure on him, there's a chance we see more of those plays. I think that he is no doubt a great field general and does what he needs to do. But if you force him to have to do a little bit more, I think that's where things can get murky for Detroit. And the 49ers, they have been a little underwhelming as far as that front line. You would think that with all the names on that group, Nick Bosa, trading for Chase Young this season, Eric Armstead, the signing of Javon Hargrave in the offseason, you would expect them to be a very lethal group up front. And they're a good defense. They've been very good against the run this year as well, but they're not quite generating as much pressure as you might expect them to. They're pretty middle of the pack in terms of pressure percentage and pass rush win rate. So we'll see. That's a matchup that I definitely have my eyes on in this one, especially continuing to monitor whether or not Detroit's linemen will be suiting up for this game. I think that if there were a time for Chase Young to really, I mean, he was good for right when he came into the 49ers organization. He had a couple big games. The sack numbers weren't totally there, but he was still putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So it's not like he's been bad by any means, but you would think that with all the names on that group, they would be spectacular, and they haven't been that just quite yet. Maybe this is the coming out party. On the Lions side here, I would imagine Laporte is going to play. He's been limited in practice this week, but that was also probably dating somewhat back to week 18 when he got hurt in the last game of the regular season. But he has played up to this point, probably just a precautionary measure, but not totally sure he's 100% even still. Speaking of not 100%, Deebo Samuel, obviously that's a big talking point with the 49ers coming into this week. I think that even if Deebo is limited, it does not change the fact that Detroit's secondary is pretty vulnerable to the pass, and they are going to need this week to make up for it, especially against all those talented skill position players, by putting pressure on Jared Goff. Last week, they were able to put pressure on Baker. They had 4 sacks. 2.5 of those came from the secondary between Brian Branch and Melifonwu. So they can send some secondary blitzes, which is nice. This is a Detroit team that led the league in pressures this season. But if you look at last week, I think that a lot of that was miscues on the Tampa Bay side of things. I don't think that they were particularly great. A lot of miscommunication errors. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson was going unblocked at times. These secondary players just coming off the edge, untouched. I'm sure that all throughout this week, the 49ers have been looking at the film from last week and saying, we cannot let this happen. So Detroit is going to have to get that push up front, and they might have to get creative because they have already put on film these sort of design blitzes that they've been running, are going to need to probably add another layer to their pass rush game. I think that 49ers are a much better offensive line than Tampa Bay. So there's no really out scheming the likes of an Aiden Hutchinson. I think that it's not too complicated to say, hey, somebody should actually block him on this play. That should never happen where he's a free rusher on a pass play. But all in all here, I think that my pick would be the 49ers. I was really leaning towards the Lions immediately following the divisional round. But as the week has gone on, as we heard about the offensive line injuries, about Deebo Samuel being able to practice some, I just feel like a lot of people are down on the 49ers right now, which is fair. It was a very unimpressive win almost, where I think that I've come out and said on the show, I thought that they were actually outplayed for the majority of that game against the Packers last week. But this is a 49ers team that is very much loaded. They very much benefit from their quarterback being on such a cheap contract that they've been able to surround him with so much talent and put all these guys together on this roster. As long as Brock Purdy is better, it's supposed to be better weather for Sunday. Again, sort of a subplot is he able to play through rain and such? Shouldn't be an issue this weekend. If I were forced to pick a side as far as the spread goes, I think that 7 points is a lot for the Lions. even just for the sake of a backdoor cover, I think that it's very possible, and we've seen them in the past be able to very quickly generate points. Feels like even dating back to the Stafford days, the Lions have just been a team that garbage time, and I don't think there's going to be true garbage time in this game, but late in those games, even when it's over somewhat, they're able to get theirs to make games a little testier than they should be. So I would probably go with the Lions +7, but I think that the 49ers win this game. So those are my picks for championship weekend. We are going to be taking another quick break, but when we come back on the other end, we're going to be sticking with the NFL after a handful of head coaching news, breaking news segments coming out over the past couple days, none of which including Bill Belichick. So we're going to be asking the question, what is next for him? So stick around with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just wrapped up our championship weekend previews for the NFL. Coming back out with a little more football here, talking Bill Belichick in the head coaching carousel. We gave some updates on the head coaching hires up to that point. We talked about the Titans got their guy, Brian Callahan, from the Cincinnati Bengals. Since then, we have two more coaching hires, neither of which are Bill Belichick, especially relevant because the Atlanta Falcons, who was the only team that Belichick interviewed with, he did so twice. They decided to go in another direction with Raheem Morris. Quick note on Morris, he supposedly killed the interview process. He was described as electric when he was in the building. Morris was with the Falcons from 2015 to 2020, holding various assistant positions, then being promoted to defensive coordinator before eventually holding the interim head coaching job after his boss, head coach Dan Quinn, was fired in 2020. Afterwards, he went to the LA Rams organization where he won a Super Bowl, and reportedly he gained a lot of maturity. That experience was incredibly valuable for him as of course, coming in the playoffs and the nuances that come with that, but as a leader too, and working under Sean McVay, who is one of the most personable players, coaches in the NFL. So he returns to Atlanta and closes that door for Belichick. And then the Carolina Panthers hired Dave Canales, which I think is a home run hire myself. I was sort of put on to him early in this coaching cycle about just coming to understand how valuable he was for Geno Smith as the quarterback's coach in 2022, helped that resurgence, helped get the Seahawks back to the playoffs in a year where nobody had the Seahawks making the playoffs last year. Their projected wins was something like 4 or 5, and they go on to even have a competitive first half against the 49ers in the playoffs last year. So he did a really good job that year. He got an offensive coordinator role this past year, hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and yet again with another quarterback that was drafted in the first round that showed some talent, but had sort of been written off, shout out Geno Smith, was Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And here they were again, not just making the playoffs, but winning a playoff game, Baker probably helped him settle into the team and likely to get another contract with the Buccaneers going forward, which, great for him, happy about that. But as far as Bill Belichick goes here, that means there are only 2 remaining head coaching vacancies. That is with the Seattle Seahawks and the Washington Commanders. Now, the Commanders have been heavily linked to Detroit's offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, which I also think would be a great hire. I've been a big fan of Ben Johnson. But Washington was really the team that I would have, if not for the Falcons, seen Bill Belichick going in with. A new owner in Washington. They obviously had a lot of skeletons in the closet, that franchise did, after Dan Snyder and all of the sort of bad culture stories that came out of that locker room. It was really a mess there for a while. And if you want to reestablish a culture, I think that Bill Belichick would be a perfect guy for that job. Again, new owner now, looking to make a splash. But that is, again, it's not written in stone yet, but that the general consensus is that they're waiting for the Lions to finish up their playoff run to speak more thoroughly with Ben Johnson and potentially offer him the job there. The Seahawks, they are currently in a wide open market as far as coaching goes. They've asked a handful of people to their second interviews. They're supposedly not in a rush to hire anybody, but Bill Belichick has not been included in any of these head coaching interviews. Not sure if Belichick would even want to go over to the West Coast like that. So it seems very likely that Belichick will not be a head coach or in the NFL at all come the 2024-25 season, which is pretty remarkable because you think about the all-time coach that he is. Any team that brings him in, especially when you're talking about a Commanders, a Falcons, a Panthers, these teams that really struggled last year, I think it's safe to say if he is your head coach, you are significantly better. I feel very confident saying that. Yes, the Patriots season did not go well this year, but that's because Bill Belichick, the GM, did a very bad job of putting together the roster. The offense was atrocious, and for the Patriots, despite losing their 2 best defenders in rookie cornerback Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon, the defensive end, they were still a top unit in the league this year. But that GM conversation is likely what sort of did Belichick in come this head coaching cycle, because there was talk coming out of the Atlanta Falcons organization that Arthur Blank, the owner, was very for it, but a lot of people in the front office were against Belichick coming into the building, and that's because Belichick, he, as we've seen from his time in New England, he might have held GM responsibilities in Cleveland as well. He is a very hands-on guy, and he likes things his way the majority of the time. He's not a huge compromise guy, and I think that there's a level of people in that Atlanta Falcons organization didn't want to relinquish some of their power to bring in Belichick. So, if not this year, what is the possibility that Belichick could sit out a season and then eventually find his way back into the league next year? Well, to start that conversation, you have to look at what types of jobs would be available next year. I think that even before looking at next year, I'm just throwing this out there, and so was Adam Schefter at the time. He said, we're just having fun here, but he was on Get Up yesterday and talked about the possibility if the Chiefs were to win the Super Bowl this season, there are a lot of people that think that Andy Reid could be looking to retire somewhat soon. if the Chiefs were to win the Super Bowl this year, and if Andy Reid were to retire and go out on top, would Belichick come in and coach the Chiefs? I think that there's probably a good possibility of that, but I don't think that Andy Reid's actually going to retire. So I'm going to be on the record and say I don't think that that's happening, but sort of is a fun little hypothetical there. Imagine Belichick coaching Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that would be just unfair, really. But for as far as next season and what types of jobs could be available, I think that you have to start with the Dallas Cowboys, where before they decided to bring back Mike McCarthy, there was a lot of rumors going on between would Belichick be going to the Cowboys. I still don't think it's a perfect fit because you're talking about a very hands-on head coach in Bill Belichick and a very hands-on owner in Jerry Jones. So maybe a little bit of conflict there, but it's definitely possible. I think that the Buffalo Bills, they are another team that they decided to bring back their head coach this season, Sean McDermott. McDermott, I think deservingly so, is coming back for next season, but you're going to have to start to look at what is, and I think that McDermott's a very good coach, but what is the ceiling with him as the head coach? They've had plenty of chances these past few years with Josh Allen, and this is with a Josh Allen that has been on a rookie contract. It's only going to get more expensive from here. They're not in a great cap situation as a team, as a whole. So they could have a disappointing year next year. I mean, this year could have been very different. They almost didn't make the playoffs after starting 6-6 and a bad loss to Philadelphia in overtime. They almost didn't even make the playoffs this year, but they did go on a run down the stretch of the year, which almost for that alone, yes, you can get on McDermott's case about the slow start, but I mean, Josh Allen practically threw that game away week 1 against the Jets, and it just never looked great there as a whole. Obviously, all the injuries on defense, so I think that it's deserved that he'll be back next year, but what happens if they fall short again? Joe Burrow will likely be back in the mix for them. We're seeing the Ravens here ascending with a healthy Lamar Jackson, so I think that he could potentially be on the hot seat. Nick Sirianni's another one. Again, I think it was right for them to bring him back, but after the collapse from going from 10-1 to not even showing up to a playoff game, yes, a lot of turnover as far as coordinators, losing both of them last year. He's now fired both of the coordinators this year and going to be starting fresh again come next season. So a lot of turnover. I think that the players really like him, but that's another one where people were calling for his name after their playoff loss this year. That would be a pretty good roster for Bill Belichick. I feel like a lot of talent on defense, but a little underwhelming as far as their linebackers group and older cornerbacks group. I think that they have so much talent on offense, and Belichick would be the perfect perfect coach, I should say, to raise up that defense and make them scary. Last two teams I'm going to throw out before the break here are the Chicago Bears and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bill Belichick is a nerd for football. He loves the history of the game. And I think that when you're looking at franchises like the Steelers and the Bears, there's so much history there. I think he would love the idea of trying to break the all-time wins record in either of those historic spots. Almost stick it to Robert Kraft a little bit. And I think that there's a chance that either of those jobs could become available last year. Tomlin's going into the last year of his contract. I don't think he gets enough credit for helping this Steelers team that, they had quarterback injuries, and even when Kenny Pickett was healthy, he wasn't great. Tons of issues with Matt Canada, their offensive coordinator. They had to fire him during the course of the season. And I think that he is going into this last year. There's a question of whether or not he's going to want to stick around there as well. I think that there have been a little bit of flashes that he's maybe losing the locker room a little bit, but I do still think that he doesn't get enough credit for winning as much as they have. Not that they've won anything in particular, but keeping them as competitive as they have been, at least with maybe middling rosters. And then as far as the Bears go, Matt Eberflus is fine. Their head coach, I don't think he's proven anything really. They had a nice turnaround to end the season, but they are probably going to be drafting Caleb Williams this year. And if this upcoming season doesn't go well for them, I could very easily see them trying to sort of establish themselves more as a win-now team, because they showed that they have promise. Despite some of the bad moves that their front office has made, they should be getting a generational talent at quarterback. They have the number one receiver. They have their own pick that they can use to probably go and get another weapon for your young quarterback. So I think that both of the Chicago and Pittsburgh jobs could potentially open up. And again, I think that Belichick, the idea of breaking history with either of those historic teams would really resonate with him. So that is all on the coaching front for now. We're going to be taking one last final break, and on the other side, we're going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors, this dynasty of the 2010s into the 2020s, but they are really struggling, so we're going to be talking about whether or not they are past the point of contention on the other side of the break. Stick with us. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Just a reminder as we go into this final segment here to like and follow. It helps us out a lot. And be sure to use the chat to make this as interactive as a show as possible. For this final segment, we are going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors, who just lost another game last night. They fell just short to their in-state rivals, the Sacramento Kings. They lost 134 to 133. They just could not play an ounce of defense really throughout that whole game. Harrison Barnes, who was with them through their first championship, he dropped 39 points on them. I mean, shout out Harrison Barnes, 2 straight 30-plus point performances for him. Just crazy stuff, really came out of nowhere. Kings are a good team, but 134 points, and it really didn't look like many of them were even contested. The Warriors just horrible on that defensive side of the ball right now, which is very unlike them. Draymond Green is still coming back from his suspension, so he's not 100%. He's been on a minutes restriction as of late. Last night they did lift that minutes restrictions, and it just wasn't enough. The Warriors in general, I mean, they scored 133 points. they were really good from the three-point line, other than Klay Thompson, who was 2 of 7. Curry scored 33 points. I thought that down the stretch, it's going to be soiled a little bit because he had the turnover in the last game of the possession that sort of sealed their fate. But I did think that he was pretty impactful through the final few minutes up until that point, and 33 points. He was nice. Jonathan Kuminga, their young forward that they drafted a couple years ago, he's really been coming around for them as of late. He added 31 points last night, and you can see there's definitely a lot of raw talent there. I mean, that's what he was viewed as coming into the league. A former G League guy is a raw talent player. But it's been an interesting fit because obviously the Warriors are always playing for championship contention, and that doesn't leave you a lot of room to really develop. And Kuminga has sort of struggled with his role. Him and Kerr have not fully seen eye to eye on what his role should be, but he, as of late at least, has seemed to be embracing his role player place on the team as of right now at least, and he is producing a lot for them, which is nice. But following this loss, the Warriors fall to 19-23 on the year. They are currently the 12th team in the Western Conference. So the question is there any way for the Warriors to salvage this season? They're just, despite being in the 12th seed, they are just 2 games out of the play-in tournament, and the teams ahead of them are the Houston Rockets and the Utah Jazz. Both of these, I think, underrated, fun, young teams, good league pass teams to watch, where I think that they're pretty entertaining. Rockets, if you catch them on an away game, maybe not quite as much. Maybe some of the most absurd home versus away splits I've seen from an NBA team in recent history. But that's also what happens when you have a younger group. But I do think that they're a fun watch. They're a good team. Alperen Şengün should be an all-star in my opinion. All of this to be said that these are teams that, especially when you're the Warriors and you see that logo, you see Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, you think that they should be better than these teams that are ahead of them right now. And I think it's still very possible, at least to sort of work your way back up into that top 10. I mean, that's not a crazy threshold, really, to think about the expectations of this franchise to crack the top 10 in the conference. They have had the hardest strength of schedule up to this point in the season, according to ESPN Analytics. So the season is going to lighten up some for them, but even if it does, and even if the Warriors were to make the play-in tournament, the next question is, well, is it even worth it? Like, how competitive can they be to come out of then the play-in tournament? Because it seems like if there's any shot they have at the postseason, it is through winning a couple extra games as a 7 through 10 seed. And then once you get to the playoffs, how much of a threat are you actually going to be to one of these top teams? Now, the very top of the Western Conference right now is the OKC Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Both very good teams right now that I even just praised yesterday during my NBA midseason awards segment. But they are younger. They're a little less mature, the Timberwolves in particular. So, I mean, nobody wants to play Steph Curry in a playoff series. Just ask the Kings that, scoring 50 points in Game 7. Not too much you can do about that. But my issue with them is I don't think that there's much room for growth as far as this season in particular to get better through acquiring other talent. And I think the reason being they have some less than ideal contracts on their books. You look at Draymond Green, a guy that they just signed to an $100 million contract this offseason when he hit free agency. The Sacramento Kings were supposedly in on him, as well as the Detroit Pistons and the Portland Trail Blazers. But I don't know how much they really would have been willing to give. I mean, if you're the Trailblazers and you are the Pistons, yes, you have cap space, so I suppose why not? But I saw NBC Bay State, that website, they were talking about how Draymond Green took so much less money to be with the Warriors. Like, it was more than $10 million that he would have gotten in other places. And I maybe have doubts, and maybe it's a little unfair, maybe it's revisionist history, but I just can't imagine one of those teams really paying $110 million for Draymond Green at this point in his career. He's still a very solid player when he's actually in check, his defense. Again, he was doing about all he could last night on the defensive end. No one else was really helping him out all too much. He added 11 assists. So he can still be valuable in some ways, but I still think that's just a lot of money for a guy who he can't score. I don't know if he had a field goal last night. I know he was entering the fourth quarter. He was 0 for 4 from the field. So I think that's just a lot of money to be paying up to a guy who can't get you any baskets. Klay Thompson is another one. He is on an expiring contract. He's making $43 million. So maybe just by the fact that he's an expiring contract, you could get something. But you probably have to attach assets to him if you want to go get. I mean, I don't know how strong the market really is anyways, especially for the Warriors, who they need defense. And Klay is not the 3-and-D guy that he was anymore. But it's not like Zach LaVine is out there and you bring him in and problems are solved. Because, yeah, he's a bucket getter, but I think that they already have those. So I'm not sure if there's a superstar like that. Andrew Wiggins has been a huge disappointment this year. He is making minimum $24 million for the next 3 seasons, and then he has a player option in 2027 where he would be making $30 million. Pretty sure he's going to pick that one up, but he's been bad. And last night, he was giving some offense, even though he was shooting something like 29% coming into the game from 3. He was fine on offense, but he's just nowhere near that defender that he was during their 2022 finals run. I was looking at cleaning the glass, and Golden State is 10.7 points per 100 possessions worse when he's on the court. Their defense gives up 11 more points on defense when he is on the court for a 100 possession span. That is in the first percentile, which means 99% of NBA players are effectively more impactful on defense when they're on the court. And that's just not what we saw at all. He was locking down Jason Tatum in that 2022 finals, and now he's unplayable at times. It really is sad, almost, really, because you never want to see someone's career sort of come into stardom, and stardom's maybe a little strong, but you know what I mean, and then falling out so quickly. I like a lot of the guys that they have on their bench. They're young guys. I like Jonathan Kuminga. Brandon Pujemski, I think, should be on an all-rookie team. Trace Jackson-Davis. They're not even playing Moses Moody anymore, but I was a fan of him early in the year when they were. And I think that it's a little bit telling where the Warriors are at right now by the fact that yesterday the All-Star starters came out, and all of the outrage was about the fact that Damian Lillard was starting in the East over Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell and Tyrese Maxey. Steph Curry isn't starting in the All-Star game. And with his popularity, his reputation, and with that fan base, the fan base that had Andrew Wiggins as an All-Star starter just 2 seasons ago, I think that says a lot. And it's not totally a statement on Curry, because Curry's still great. Notice how I didn't mention him in that list of people that I think are probably making too much money for them. But it goes to show where the Warriors are at right now. And I do think that they're probably done. They have a top 4 protected pick. It goes to Portland. They're definitely not going to go for the tank. But especially with this upcoming draft, it's not seen to be great. But that's kind of closer to what they are, I think, than winning the NBA Finals. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I'm a Celtics fan. There's a part of me that is still hurt by the Warriors stealing championship 18 from the Celtics, but basketball is fun when Steph Curry's on a good team and the Warriors are good. And that's just not really the case anymore. Again, it's not that they are at a full lack of talent, but this 2 timelines thing with the younger guys assimilating them into the championship core, it just hasn't really panned out for them. And I think that with the contracts they have on the books, I think that they're really handicapped right now as far as being able to figure themselves out with this iteration of the Warriors. That is all I have for today to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Your support means a lot to us. Remember to like. We will be back on Monday, same time, 2 o'clock. So we will see you then.